Welcome to Community Chat. This particular episode features State Senator John Keenan. Of course, the senator serves the Norfolk and Plymouth districts. He is our guest, as we have him on pretty much on a regular basis, just to kind of keep folks up to speed with some of the things that he's doing within the district and up on Beacon Hill. Senator, welcome to the show and welcome to 2022.
Great to be here. It's great to see you again, Kevin. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to say hello and say hello to the people of Abington. It's nice to see everybody virtually.
I think the last time you and I talked, it was prior to Christmas. If you were to kind of put 2021 in a brief synopsis legislatively, what were your thoughts on the year that was 2021?
I think it would be marked by a year of figuring out the best way to invest the state surplus and the federal money that we got from Congress. That is something that we spent a lot of time on. There were a lot of public hearings on different subject matters, whether it was housing, transportation, our behavioral health system, our medical health system. There were a lot of hearings designed to get feedback on the best way to invest the ARPA money.
Yeah, how does your particular district benefit from the American Rescue Plan Act? This is from the Biden administration, and I believe that the Senate voted somewhere around 36-3 for the $4.5 billion package.
Yeah, so there's an awful lot in there, and it really spread out across a whole lot of different areas. For instance, in the housing area, that's an area that I was pretty actively involved in as chair of the Senate chair of the Joint Committee on Housing. So we looked to invest funding in housing production, whether it be for home ownership housing or rental housing. We invested money in supportive housing to help those that are struggling with addictions and mental health problems so that they can have housing that provides them supports as well. We focused or provided some investment into our public housing. For years, that has been underfunded, so this was an opportunity to make sure that we could fix roofs, upgrade heating systems, and ensure that the water supply and the sewer systems at those facilities all across the Commonwealth and in my district as well were addressed. There's money that was dedicated for education. We invested money in workforce training. We put about $500 million into the unemployment trust fund to replenish that, and that will help small businesses all across the Commonwealth, including in the Norfolk and Plymouth district. And then one of the important things that we did was we allocated a significant amount of money towards our rainy day account, towards our stabilization account. And while that may not help people right now, in the long term, it provides financial stability for the Commonwealth, so that if we find ourselves in a situation where our revenues drop because of an economic crisis of some sort, we're able to even that off. And that's important for the students in our schools, for the seniors in our senior centers, for the veterans who rely on veteran services, for law enforcement and firefighters, so that they have the resources that they need, even during an economic downturn. So we did all of those things with the idea of, investing back into the Commonwealth and into our communities.
Yeah, if you will, if you could talk about the state stabilization fund and how crucial it was for the past couple of fiscal years when revenues were tough, that the state had those monies to tap into if needed.
It was vitally important. When this pandemic hit, there was a concern that we were going to see a drop in state revenues that were even more drastic than what we saw back in 2008 at the start of the Great Recession. So there was a real concern about what was going to happen and how we were going to meet those challenges. And fortunately, as we went into this most recent financial downturn, beginning back in March, when basically the Commonwealth and the country shut down, people were without employment, people needed unemployment benefits, they needed access to their health care. We were able to do a draw from our stabilization account to kind of level off those shortfalls until the federal money came. And so it was absolutely critically important that we had those reserves in place. Thankfully, in year 2 of this pandemic, we didn't have to rely on those one-time stabilization funds because the federal money had come in and our state revenues rebounded pretty quickly. And so rather than draw from that account, again, we've put additional money into it so that it'll be twice basically what it was, and it'll be perhaps one of the top 3 reserves of any state in the country. So it's really important to help us against fight against future economic downturns. And it also helps us when we go out to borrow money for roads and bridges and for school construction, that our bond rating is a good bond rating because we have that type of reserve in place. So it's a win-win, and it's very helpful during the early stages of the pandemic and will prove to be very helpful as we move forward.
And this isn't something that's going to be, these funds aren't something that's going to be like the CARES Act fund, where you had a limited timetable in which they were spent and that they were going to be distributed. These monies are going to be rolled out over the next, I mean, they're being rolled out now, but it's going to be for the next few years. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the next couple of years, the ARPA money has to be basically allocated and then spent, and I think it's by fiscal year 2024, and I can confirm that. So we have a couple of years, but that goes by very quickly in the grand scheme of things. And so we did the initial round of ARPA funding just recently, and we are in the process of planning the next stage or the next round of funding. And the goal will be to make sure that those funds are allocated and that they are then put to use as quickly as possible so that we meet the deadlines imposed by the federal government. And that's not to say we're going to rush just to spend the money. And that's why both the House, the Senate, and then also the governor are taking a very thoughtful approach to how to do this.
You know, at the time of our conversation now, we're dealing with the Omicron COVID virus. What are your concerns as an elected leader seeing this now? As of late, the numbers are trending downward slightly for the Commonwealth. What are your concerns? Here we are going into a 3rd year of dealing with COVID.
The immediate concerns of making sure that we keep people healthy, for those that are exposed to the virus, that they get the medical care they need if they need it. For those that are concerned about whether they have it and whether they're going to spread it, making sure that they have access to testing. For those who want to get their booster shots or start the process of even getting their first or second shots, that they have access to all of that, that we still have the personal protective equipment that we need for our medical professionals, that we have students that are getting as good education as possible during these difficult times. Those are all the immediate concerns related to the pandemic and with Omicron in particular. Longer term, we've got so much to rebuild. We've got to rebuild our behavioral health system to help those with mental illness and addiction issues. That has been a real challenge. We have found that more people are experiencing behavioral health issues as a result of the pandemic. We've got the longer term issue of addressing that students in many cases haven't had quite the quality of education that they otherwise would have during this period. And part of that is due to the interruptions that have occurred and the uncertainty that has surrounded this pandemic. We're going to make sure in longer terms that we kind of reintegrate seniors, for instance, that have spent so much time at home, that they get back out in the community, back out to the senior centers, back out and engaged with their neighbors and their friends and their relatives. So we've got in the law enforcement and criminal justice field, we've got to get back to providing the programs that we know work in keeping people out of our criminal justice system. And so there's so much work to do long term. There's going to be quite a period of time in which we will feel the impacts of this pandemic, and we've got to commit to starting addressing those right now.
If you're just tuning in, we are speaking with this. You are tuned in to Community Chat, and this is our chat with the State Senator John Keenan. As we close out talking about 2021, one of the other things that were on the plate, the discussion was about redistricting, and of course, this won't take place until 2023. How will your particular district change and evolve in the next elected year?
The biggest change will be I will continue to represent, the district will continue to include, and hopefully I will continue to represent if I'm successful with the election, but the district will continue to include all of Quincy, all of Holbrook, all of Rockland, all of Abington. The district will go from 9 precincts in Braintree down to 3 precincts in Braintree, and the district will next year include the town of Hanover. So the population that was in Braintree that was moved will be replaced with the population in Hanover. And that's how the district will change. And hopefully this time next year, I will be back in the State House representing the new Norfolk and Plymouth district.
So I want to discuss something that took place prior to this particular conversation, and that is that you had a legislative briefing in regards to folks who are dealing with multiple sclerosis. Talk to us about your particular bill. It's S.686. That briefing took place this week. What was it like?
It was a briefing, I think, that was overdue and was incredibly impactful. So what people who have MS, what they deal with is the process once they're diagnosed of finding disease-modifying treatment or medication that works best for them, that works to basically stall the progress of the disease. And that can be a very long, complicated, and involved process. And ultimately, if it goes well, they find a medication that works for them. Oftentimes, then what happens is an insurance company may change its formulary, and they may have to try a different medication, and they find themselves regressing with the concern that they'll never get back that which they've lost as a result of a change in medication. And they may lose access to the medication that works as a result of a change in formulary, as I say, a change in job, unemployment. Any one of those things can result in them being forced to try a different medication. So the legislation that we filed would guarantee them access to the medication that works. And we were able in our briefing to present a video that had been prepared by Peter in my office, who did an incredible job with it. He went out and he interviewed people who have MS, and they talked about these issues, they talked about access to these treatments and their concerns about and their experiences with having lost access to the medications. So they told their very personal stories, and they were so compelling. And I think all those folks that were at the briefing realized that this is a very serious, real issue. And we have to find a way to make sure that people with MS continue on these medications. It is not only critical for them and their families, but, and you hate to put it in terms of dollars and cents, but it also just makes financial sense. While these medications are incredibly expensive, the cost associated with moving from one of these medications to another one that doesn't work, and the relapse and the hospitalizations and the impact on job and families is so much more expensive than the cost of the medication itself. So there's a real, obviously, personal health reason to keep people on these medications, and an overall impact on our health system reason for keeping people on the medications. But I have to say that those that told their stories in the video and then presented after the video and took questions from people, it was just incredibly inspiring. It's tough enough, and we just can't imagine getting a diagnosis of MS. And not only have these people gotten that diagnosis, worked their way through it, but while doing all of that, while trying to work, while trying to have a family, and then taking the time out to help others, to express the need for this legislation, it was not pretty inspiring. It was incredibly inspiring. And I think everybody at the briefing felt that. And hopefully, because of their stories and the legislation is designed to help them and people like them, that we're going to get this legislation passed.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage folks. I myself have seen the videos on the senator's website, Senator John Keenan, KEENAN.com, and under the tab, the legislation tab, the legislative priorities, you'll see S.686, an act promoting continuity of care for multiple sclerosis treatment. And you could see, as you scroll down, you could see those testimonies, and those testimonies are surreal. And I think your staff did a fantastic job in capturing the essence of the individuals who are either they're dealing with it themselves or family members are dealing with it, and knowing that their real concern is that at any time there could be a change in what they're being prescribed, and it could be because of a change in insurance. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah. So and so I definitely would ask folks to go to the website to check that out. So what happens now with this piece of legislation? What do you wait for now?
The legislation is in the Financial Services Committee, so hopefully it will be reported out of that committee with a favorable recommendation, and then make its way to another committee or to Ways and Means Committee, and ultimately to the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate for a vote. There's also a bill out there that deals with step therapy, which is somewhat related. And if that bill moves forward, then we're hopeful that the MS language will be included with it. There is somewhat of a connection between the two. So we're going to keep pushing and try to get this passed by the end of the legislative session, which is the end of July.
I would imagine that the Commonwealth would have governance over insurance companies and any direction they may take in offering coverage. Am I wrong, or is there really a need for a measure like this to make sure that there's some kind of safeguard in place?
That's a great way to describe it. Make sure there's a safeguard in place. The insurance companies have been at the table with us, and they have been helpful in helping us craft language, and they challenge us on different things that we are looking to include, and we challenge them on whether they will say, think that's a good idea or not. So it's a working relationship, but the goal is really to safeguard this so that somebody who has MS doesn't have to worry about whether their insurance company will provide coverage, but the next insurance company that they go to may not. This would make sure that across the board there is that safeguard in place and that they will have access to these critical medications.
Staying in the medical realm of conversation, to me, you've long been known as the champion of the opioid epidemic when it comes to legislation, making sure there aren't doctors out there that are actually writing these scripts and folks are actually are overdosing from the opioids that are being prescribed. There's another bill that you have in the works in regards to recovery coaches. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. So what we have learned, and we learned a lot of this from the mental health side, where people with lived experience, meaning they have dealt with mental health issues, or on the substance side, they have dealt with addiction issues, that they have so much to offer and that they are willing to offer that. And on the mental health side of it, it's often known as peer-to-peer, building peer-to-peer relationships, peer-to-peer coaching, peer-to-peer services. And on the substance use side, it's become known as recovery coaches, people who are there to help those struggling with addiction through the recovery process. And recovery coaches know that process because they have gone through it all. And while they're willing to help now and provide this valuable resource and assistance, oftentimes it's not covered by insurance companies. Those that are providing it, there's different standards. They're not licensed or certified in any sort of standardized way. So the legislation that we have filed would certify and license recovery coaches, and then that will kind of more, because it would be standardized, would be more legitimized, and therefore more likely to be covered by insurance companies. And so getting that license and certification in place will lead to coverage, and that will lead to a better wage. And so people would be more willing to enter this field and to provide that incredibly valuable experience. On the AA side, it's been done informally over the years through the sponsor program, and that has worked really well. On this, given the opioid epidemic and the crisis that we find ourselves within, we need these recovery coaches to help people through the process. And so we're working on that legislation as well. We think that it's very important. And one of the things we know from the pandemic is that now for the last 2 years, people have been cut off in a lot of cases from harm reduction, treatment, and recovery services. and we've got to get back to providing those services so that the overdose rate, that overdose death rate, which has climbed, comes back down, that overdose rates come back down, and that addiction rates come back down. And that's the goal of this legislation.
So I would ask you, it's interesting you mentioned that in regards to the overdose deaths that have actually started to rise again. We were starting to see them drop prior to the pandemic. Anything being done legislatively to help to kind of get things back on the right track in regards to getting those numbers down and getting people help? I know this is one avenue to help with peer-to-peer recovery support. But what else is being done in that avenue to help folks who turn to drugs as a source of living?
Sure. Through some of the federal money and with our regular state budget and some surplus money, we're renewing our effort on prevention. That's obviously the best approach is to prevent people from experimenting with these drugs or from progressing down the path of dependency towards addiction. We are reinvesting in harm reduction, making sure that if people are using drugs, that they're doing so in a safe way. So things like needle exchanges are very important. They help prevent the spread of HIV, endocarditis, or hepatitis. So we're renewing our commitment to harm reduction. In treatment, we are investing in medication-assisted treatment. That is state of the art now. That includes methadone and Suboxone and making sure that people have access to those and the counseling that goes with that. Because there are some people that seems to work best for. We are investing still and in more in making sure that we have detox beds, step-down beds, and long-term recovery beds available for people. And then on the recovery end of it, as people have made their way through the initial stages, we're focusing on providing supportive housing, sober homes, and those types of things. And then, the renewed focus on job training and assistance to reintegrate people back into society as they have become stable in their recovery. So a lot going on.
So as we look ahead and we transition from talking about the recovery coach licensure to looking ahead to 2022, what are your thoughts as we move forward, whether it's getting ready to put together another, the fiscal year 23 budget? What other things are you looking ahead to? Is it a matter of hoping that we're done with COVID, or the reality of is COVID's not going anywhere?
I think that's the reality, that we're going to have to deal with COVID through the balance of this current fiscal year. And then as we prepare the budget for the next fiscal year, COVID will have an impact on that as well, funding many of the programs that I just talked about. So we are in the process now of moving through the budget preparation. And just today, I had a conversation with the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Senator Rodrick from the Fall River area, about a consensus revenue figure. That's the building block for the budget. What can the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the governor's office agree to as to revenues that will be available upon which to build the budget? They're very close in terms of determining what that revenue will look like. And once that's done, then the actual building of the budget will occur. We're also will be looking at investing the remainder of the ARPA funds. And again, we'll go through the exercise of where to best allocate those monies so that they do the most good for the most people. And then we will go through the regular legislative process. We've got so many different pieces of legislation, 6,400 bills that are filed that will have to be addressed. And we in our office will continue to focus on housing, on the opioid epidemic, bills like drug stewardship. We've got another health bill that we're working on, which is the More Affordable Care Act, which attempts to rein in some of our health care spending. Locally, we will continue to try to get funding for water and sewer. I know water is an issue pretty much in all the communities that I represent. PFAS is a big concern, so we'll continue to try to address that. We will, obviously continue our focus on providing resources for education, for police, fire, veterans, libraries, senior services, and many of those face the challenges of COVID. and they have to rebound as well. And so we're going to try to provide as much assistance as we can to them. So it's going to be a busy several months as we get through the balance of this legislative session.
Any successful lawmaker knows that constituent services is important. If you have any constituents who want to reach out, have any questions about something that's going on in the district, or they have a concern that they feel that your office can assist with, how can they do that?
They can call us at 617-722-1494, 617-722-1494, or send an email to john.keenan@masenate, that's one word, .gov. When they call the office, they'll get most likely Doug or Doreen. We take great pride that over the course of this pandemic, that whenever somebody called, during normal business hours and many times even afterwards, they got somebody on the other end of the phone in person. And we want to make sure that that people know that it's so important that there be that personal connection. And Doreen in my office, many people in the district in Abington and elsewhere are familiar with her, the work that she did throughout the pandemic, connecting people to unemployment insurance, connecting them to health insurance, making sure that they had the resources they need. People who needed food, she put them in contact with the right organizations and the right state agencies. The work that she did was really remarkable. And I say that for all the folks in the office. We've got some new people in the office. We've got Mark Sturman, who's Chief of Staff, Morgan Simcoe, who's the Legislative Director, Peter Jasinski, who you've dealt with, is our Communications Director. Doreen does our Constituent Services, and Doug Newton is a legislative aide. And the work that they have done over the course of this pandemic has really been incredible. They enjoy doing it. It can be a little overwhelming at times, but they don't let that deter them. So please, if you have a concern, a need, reach out, 617-722-1494. That's our first priority, particularly now during this pandemic.
Final question, and I call it the blank check question, because you can touch upon anything that you want. You can fill in the line, anything we haven't touched upon during our conversation, but you want to at least take a moment to touch upon.
No, I just want, I guess what I would convey is for people who are in need, do not hesitate to reach out. Don't wait till your situation gets so dire that you don't feel like there's anywhere you can turn. The legislature, the governor at the state level, the federal government, and then municipal governments in Abington and all the towns and cities that I represent, they've worked really hard to put supports and programs in place. And so if you're worried about where your next meal is going to come from, whether you're going to have enough money to heat your house over the course of the next couple of months, whether you are waiting for an unemployment payment that should have come a week or 2 weeks ago, and you're wondering, I'm at the end, I don't know what to do, that you're concerned about access to testing or anything like that, please reach out. We will put you in touch, if we can't handle it directly, with the people who can. And that's not to say that we bat 1,000 on these, but we certainly try really hard. And again, I'm so lucky to have the team in place, and we will do whatever we possibly can for the people who live in Abington, Braintree, Quincy, Holbrook, Rockland. And we're getting calls from other districts because they heard of the work that the team was doing. So we're happy to help out in any way. Please do not hesitate to reach out.
And Senator, we want to thank you for making yourself available and your staff making this possible for us to be able to have this conversation to better inform the folks in your district, well, whether they're in district or out of district, as to some of the things that are going on in and around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we thank you again.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here and look forward to chatting again.
You got it. And we want to thank you at home for tuning into this episode of Community Chat. Until next time, have a great day.